BBC Radio Kent.
You're listening to On the Air with me, Paul Obey, here on BBC Radio Kent, and tonight we are talking about the social care industry. As I mentioned, one of my guests is Mei Ling, who is a partner of the law firm Royds, Withy & King. I'm also thrilled to have as my second guest Tony Stein, who is the Chief Executive of Healthcare Management Solutions, a company that's operated many care homes and also provides consultancy services to the social care sector. And good evening to you, Tony.
Good evening, Paul. You well?
Very well, thanks, and I hope you're well. I know you've been busy this evening, so it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, no, pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Tony, I don't know if you were keeping up with the previous conversation there with Mei Ling, but obviously one of the questions I would have for you, you are a very experienced care home operator in the social care sector. Now, one of the big pieces of breaking news over the weekend was Operation Yellowhammer. Now, I'm just wondering, as a care home operator, what your thoughts are about that, because it did paint a very kind of negative situation to the extent that on November the 1st we are in a no deal Brexit scenario, and specifically mentioning the impact on the care home sector. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in respect to that.
Oh well, there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, firstly, can I just talk about the EU workers situation?
Sure.
I'm always very wary of believing data given in the context of Brexit. I think it's often used as a political tool, and we have some data which shows that there are approximately 7% of EU workers making up our social care workforce. But that figure varies widely from around 2% up in the northeast down to about 12% in London. But we also have to bear in mind that a lot of these EU workers, something like, according to the government, 21% of workers are EU nationals but are already British citizens. So I'm sometimes wary of hearing about how many EU workers are working in the workforce, some of whom already have British nationality, British citizenship, should I say.
Okay.
There's 50% of EU workers as well who arrived in or before 2015 may have settled status under the EU settlement scheme, under the statement of intent from the government. So I don't think that the situation is quite as drastic as is being painted. But I think there's a bigger issue. I mean, we operate, as you know, a number of care homes. I think we've got a workforce of around 2,500 people. Within that, we've got 330 people who are EU nationals, and there's 138 from non-EU countries. So remember as well that the care home sector draws in widely from around the world, not just the EU. So that's something else just to bear in mind, particularly for our qualified staff. But I think for me the biggest issue is when it comes to staffing. How do we make it attractive for our own domestic workforce?
Yeah.
Particularly for carers. I mean, carers are maligned in some ways as being, sort of the lower paid workforce and unskilled. But I have to say, having done the job myself, it's a difficult job, and its people need to be rewarded appropriately. But that, of course, is a whole different issue that brings us back to the funding of the social care sector. We can't, as operators, often reward our staff as well as we would like, simply because we're dependent often on local authorities and the NHS to fund, and
they're under real pressure.
And are under real pressure. So there's a problem. So, I suppose summing up, I just think Project Fear is at work to some degree on the whole issue of EU nationals. We could decide post-Brexit that, as Mei Ling was saying, that we could make an exception for care workers as we do for nurses under Tier 2.
Sure. Look, I mean, you make some very valuable points, and we will build on those. But I just want to bring in Martin. Martin, who's called in. Martin, good evening to you.
Yeah, good evening. This goes back. In my case, I was first started working for the NHS here on the computer research branch in 1975, and this was what's happening today was predicted then. And of course, the only way out of this, you've got to find more funding. Now, not only have I been involved in this personally, from a personal level, administering certain legislation that applies to nurses, but also I was married to a district nurse, and I watched her trying to provide a service to care homes, because care homes don't necessarily need a qualified nurse on duty, although a lot do have it these days, because they find they can provide a better overall service.
Yeah.
So we're looking now at how we're going to get the best out of the workforce that's available. Now, obviously, nurses come to this country from Romania and so on, and they come as qualified nurses, and they're paid, well, I know 2 or 3 of them personally, so I know what they're paid, and it's not a high salary. But nevertheless, it is a substantial amount of money considering what the rest of them are paid. Now, what do you do? Do you turn it all round and say, well, we recognise that carers provide a very essential part of this workforce and are a bit maligned at the moment, and under sort of thought of, if that's the right word. And do we introduce, say, a professional care organisation rather similar to the nurses, so that they're running parallel with them and, if you like, supporting the nurses?
So your point is maybe because, and I don't know, maybe Tony or Mei Ling can comment on this, but at the moment there's very much you've got the qualified nurses who are highly qualified and highly trained. You then have, if you like, the care workers. But it may well be that there is I think what you're saying is there too big a gap? And maybe these care workers, there needs to be some kind of interim qualification between nurses and care workers, which can elevate care workers to a more, if you like, professional status. Is that your point?
Well, the point I'm trying to make, actually, there used to be 2 different types of nurses. There was the SDN and the SRN.
Yeah.
And the SDN was the one who was very much a sort of practical nurse. The SEN was the one who was a career-type nurse. Now, that's changed now. But, I mean, it seems to me that the old SEN as was could quite easily become the state care worker. In other words, run parallel to the qualified, the degree nurse, and then fit the whole lot together and get a proper nursing care service.
Yeah, there is.
Well, let me bring in Tony and Mei Ling on this. And Tony, what is your thought on the points that Martin from Hythe is raising there?
I think Martin's absolutely spot on, but it's already been recognised in the sector, and we now have what we call a CHAPS, which is a care home assistant practitioner, which is a carer who has undertaken more extensive training in certain areas and can become a right-hand man to the nurse on duty. And often in care homes, because there's a nurse shortage, and actually because it fits the skill mix better, we can have a nurse and a CHAPS on rather than 2 nurses, and that actually makes a lot of sense. I often have this discussion with nurses about the skills required in care homes. Now, it is changing, and it's changing quite quickly. I think people are coming into care homes with much greater needs, much higher dependencies, and nurses have a lot of responsibility in care homes. And actually, having highly skilled carers to work alongside them is something that we should all welcome. And I think it's a program that's running now, and I'm seeing a lot more carers enrolling on the CHAP scheme. So it does elevate their status as well, rightly so, because they perform a very, very valuable task.
Martin, hopefully that addresses your point.
Okay, well, I'm very pleased to hear that. I really am. I mean, I'm in the latter part of my life, and it's come as news to me. I'm very, very pleased to hear what I've just said. I really am, and I think that's the way forward, really, because we do need a service as we get older, as everybody knows, and we've got to do something about it. We've got to find the money for it, and we've got to, if you like, get the right planning behind it as well.
Absolutely, and it's such a critical sector, and part of the desire for this show is it does need a wider airing, these issues. So, Martin, thank you very much for your contribution there. Have a great evening, and thanks a lot for that question.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And so, Tony and Mei Ling, I think what Martin is kind of highlighting there, and Tony, I really appreciate your response there. There is a real kind of issue. Well, firstly about the numbers of if you like, the nurses and care workers within the sector. Tony, I totally get your point that a lot of these care workers who've come from Europe are now British citizens. So to what extent is this project fear or is this project reality? But notwithstanding that, with an ageing population going forward, there is a significant requirement for resources within this sector, is there not?
Yeah, it goes back to 2000 and the professionalisation of the nursing workforce, and that was a very good idea. It sort of, if you like, did away with the old SEN as we knew it, which was the vocational route into nursing at that time. Unfortunately, it was appalling workforce planning, but I think we completely underestimated the number of nurses that were going to be needed, and so the number of nurse training places in universities wasn't anywhere near sufficient, and actually now we're paying the price. I think trying to attract more nurses to training is the key, and I think some mistakes the government have made recently are, reducing the funding for nurse placements at university and so on. So I think we need to be thinking very, very carefully about how we attract more people into the care sector. And it's not just nurses. I mean, nurses are a very interesting topic. I think the skills mix is very, very important, and I think having more highly trained carers to support the nurses that we do have in the short term is the only solution. Longer term, clearly we need more nurses. We've got an aging population, but in the short term, we've got to look for practical solutions today. Yeah. And there are some absolutely excellent carers out there who've got a real ambition to learn and to develop their careers, and this is a perfect opportunity for them. And I would implore any carers listening to this show that actually have some real drive or ambition to further their careers to look to enrol on these schemes, because the opportunities are fantastic for them.
Mei Ling, do you have any additional points to make over and above what Tony's just said?
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said, and I do think it's very important for carers to have the chance to be more recognised with professional qualifications and to professionalise, that aspect of the sector generally. I also think, there's a lot of scope for innovation in the sector, which is part of the way forward, in addition to just talking about getting more staff, training them better and paying them better. So innovations that can, for example, free up staff time so that they spend less time on paperwork and more time engaging with the people who they're providing care for, sitting down, having a chat, talking about things, having a cup of tea, and just making sure that they are emotionally looked after as well as physically looked after. If we can, focus on that kind of innovation as well, I think that's probably part of the answer. And we've seen a lot of this development coming out of countries like Japan, China, where they really are even in more of a pickle, I think, than we are here in terms of having the younger people available in the workforce to look after their aging populations. China had a one-child policy for many years, and as a result of that, they've got a very big aging population and not as many younger people. And in Japan, it's something similar, and there's a real shortage of workers in Japan as well. So they are progressing apace with things like robotics and artificial intelligence and, different ways of streamlining the kind of mundane processes and the data processing and the paperwork that needs to be done. So that, in turn, sort of frees the workers up, the care workers and everybody else, to look after people a bit better. So I think that's probably part of the solution as well.
And Mei Ling, I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to build on that in the next few minutes and talk about the innovation that may be there that will help the social care sector to the extent there are real resource constraints. You look at any industry, what they will do is try and react with technological developments as well to assist in the resourcing. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit further. And clearly, if anyone has any thoughts or observations in terms of their experience with the social care sector, why don't they text me on 81333? They can begin their text with the word Kent, or they can give me a call on 0800 756 1111. But before we do that, we're going to go to the weather with Jen Bartram.
After a dry night tonight, Wednesday will start off on a bright note with plenty of sunshine during the morning. It will gradually turn a little bit cloudier through the course of the afternoon with a light breeze and temperatures reaching around 21 degrees Celsius. Through the rest of the week, the temperatures will be climbing, so by the weekend we'll see highs of 25 degrees Celsius.
The Dominic King Show.
Live music continues on a very special day for us.
It's been an incredible thing for last year. This is our 152nd session.
Weeknights from 6.
BBC Radio Kent.
Let's go to the travel with Sophie.
Well, near Chatham tonight, Luton High Street is still closed in both directions due to emergency repairs between Capstone Road and Luton Road. We're still not sure when that will reopen, so that is causing delays as you travel through Medway tonight. Elsewhere, the M20 westbound is closed for overnight roadworks from junction 11 to junction 9 at Ashford. That's until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. And in Maidstone, the A26 Tunbridge Road is closed in both directions due to gas main work from Oakwood Road to Weston Road. There's no reports of problems on public transport this evening, and there'll be more travel throughout the evening.
Thank you, Sophie.
BBC Radio Kent.
Call 0800 756 1111 or text Kent to 81333. Texts are charged at your standard message rate. See our privacy notice at bbc.co.uk/local radio privacy.
Now, just a couple of dates for the diary. Well, tomorrow evening, Graham Jones will be hosting On The Air. On Wednesday evening means coverage of legal matters. And On The Air at 9 p.m. tomorrow evening, Graham's show is entitled Blow That Whistle, where Graham will be asking what is meant by whistleblowing. And as an employee, is one protected if they feel the need to whistleblow? You can contact the show either on calling 0800 756 1111 or by text on 81333, beginning your text with the word Kent. Now, you are listening to On The Air with me, Paul Obey, here on BBC Radio Kent, and I have two guests with me, Mei Ling Huang and Tony Stein. And I just want to build with you on the points we are making just before we went to the weather and travel, and especially on this point about technology. And Mei Ling, I know that you have been involved with an organisation called the Care Innovation Hub. Can you just talk a little bit about what that's trying to do?
Yeah, sure. So the nice thing that we see happening in the sector at the moment with innovation is that people are being very generous about it, and people are sort of forgetting about the fact that they might be in competition with each other and working really very collaboratively to try to come up with new ideas to make things better in the sector, make care better, and give a better quality of life to people. So there is a group of guys working in the sector who are friends, and they got together and they decided that they wanted to find a way to help the sector develop and innovate. So they created this thing called the Care Innovation Hub, which basically holds what they call a hackathon each year. And the point of the hackathon is that it's a contest to get together and create new ideas for the sector, and then, with these ideas, come up with pitches for the ideas and new products, and things that can be used within the sector. So they take mostly young, very inventive people, and some of them work in the sector and some don't work in the sector, and they get them to turn their creative energies to solving some of the sector's kind of thorny problems. So they bring the issues to light for them. So things like the workforce problem that we were talking a minute ago, and they match them up also with experienced mentors from the sector. So, for example, my firm, we were the legal advisors, and there were a lot of very well-known care providers in the sector who, their chief execs came along, their innovation people came along, and they all helped to support these young inventors to come up with ideas. And the eventual idea is to support these new innovations through the development stage and get them launched in the market so that everybody can benefit from them.
Mei Ling, can we look, I just want to continue that point. What I'd like to do just at the moment, I'd just like to welcome back our DAB listeners who have been enjoying our football coverage of Gillingham versus Blackpool, which ended in 2-2, which apparently was a really thrilling match, but I just want to welcome them back. So yes, if you can just build on what you were talking about there, I think it sounds like a really interesting initiative.
Yeah, so this year at the Care Innovation Hub, some of the projects tried to tackle things like preventing medication errors in care homes. Another was an idea about activities and nutrition and making growing things for people fun. Another was about matching people who need care at home with carers who speak their language and understand their cultural backgrounds. There was another idea that had to do with using artificial intelligence to predict and prevent falls in care homes and actually in people's homes as well. So there were all kinds of interesting ideas that came out of this. And as I say, they were backed up by experienced providers, so people like Hallmark Care and Orchard Care and WCS and Home Instead, these very well-known companies who are actually giving guidance and advice and helping these inventors understand on a practical level how care works and talking to them about the feasibility of the projects that they're doing and helping them develop these things. And they're all giving their time just to help benefit the sector generally and benefit everybody. So I think that was a really lovely sort of collaborative way of working that put aside, commercial competition and self-interest and ended up being something really, really positive. So, my hat's off to them.
Yeah, look, that's great. And I'm just wondering, listening to what Mei Ling says there, is there any thoughts that you may have about where care homes need to go, especially from a innovative technological point of view? And you can contact the show in one of the following ways.
Call Paul now.
0800 756 1111 or text Kent to 81333.
BBC Radio Kent.
You are listening to On the Air with me, Paul Obey, here on BBC Radio Kent, and the focus tonight is on the social care sector. And my guest then, Mei Ling Huang, was talking about some of the technological advances that are being looked at and the initiatives within the social care sector. And I'd just like to go to my second guest, Tony Stein, who's the Chief Executive of Healthcare Management Solutions. Tony, I don't know if that resonates with you, what Mei Ling was talking about there. And are there any kind of examples you've seen within the care home sector about where technology has really played a valuable role?
Yes, I think it's. I'm afraid it's not as exciting or as dynamic as perhaps often technology is. I think I was very, very pleased to hear what Mei Ling was saying earlier on, and I have to fully agree that I think we need to make an environment or create an environment within the care homes where the care staff can spend more productive and effective contact time with the residents and spend less time worrying about filling in pieces of paper. And I think the problem arises in a society where everything has to be checked and recorded continually.
Yeah.
And so what actually happens is that, carers spend a lot of their day trying to spend quality time with residents and to assist with some of the challenges that older people often face in care homes, loneliness, isolation, in some cases from family. I'm not talking from each other, but from family, and vulnerability. So there's a lot of that goes on. But unfortunately, they do spend an awful lot of time trying to protect themselves by evidencing every single thing that they do, and it's a national trait. I think every time something happens, somebody puts another piece of paper or check in to place to try and record what's happening and prevent it happening again. And before you know it, you end up spending more time with a piece of paper than you do with a resident. So any technology that comes in that can minimise that amount of time, in my mind, is a real winner. And that's where we need to concentrate the effort.
Yeah, and it seems from what we said on this call, there's effort that's got to be concentrated in a number of different areas, but clearly this is going to be one area that would be incredibly valuable to the social care sector. I'm very conscious that we are, as ever, having a great conversation, but we are running out of time. So I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts or questions that you have for my guests, then by all means give us a call on 0800 756 1111 or text me on 81333 and begin your text with the word Kent. That is One Last Time with Ariana Grande. You're listening to On the Air with me, Paul Obey, here on BBC Radio Kent. And tonight we're focusing on the social care sector. I have two great guests with me, Mei Ling Huang, partner at the law firm Royds Withy King and head of the social care regulatory team there, and also Tony Stein, Chief Executive of Healthcare Management Solutions, a company that's operated many care homes and provided consultancy services to the social care sector. And Mei Ling and Tony, obviously conscious that we have relatively few minutes left. I'd just like to close by talking about Operation Yellowhammer. And I noticed that Nick Thomas Simmons, the Shadow Solicitor General, came out on Monday and said that that this was not Project Fear at all. This was Project Reality in terms of Operation Yellowhammer. And I'm just wondering, and let me go to you, Tony, first of all. You made some very good point there earlier about the fact that a lot of these, in inverted commas, EU people who are working here are actually British residents. Where do you sit on Operation Yellowhammer?
I'm absolutely delighted that the government's taking Brexit seriously and preparing for it. So I don't think the fact that they have an Operation Yellowhammer is something to be worried about. I think it's something we would expect our government to do. I think the issue from a social care perspective is, I mean, there are obviously 12 areas where the government are looking in detail at what the implications of a hard Brexit, a no-deal Brexit would bring. And from a social care point of view, you know, we run a number of care homes, 55 care homes around the UK, and our main worries are around drug supplies, food supplies, obviously utilities, fuel, and so on. So, you know, we're liaising with our suppliers to make sure that should there be a no-deal Brexit, that as far as is humanly possible, there are no interruptions to the supply of necessary goods and services to our homes, so that our residents aren't impacted in any way. So it's really from a social care perspective, all operators are now liaising with their major suppliers to make sure that those interruptions are minimised.
Yeah, and I think one of the points, and I'd like Mei Ling's thoughts on this, one of the points that came out was that social care home operators are going to come under real financial pressure going forward. There was also, I think, Mei Ling, I read an article you mentioned recently, or you wrote recently, that including there may be a VAT exemption for the sector. Where are your thoughts on Operation Yellowhammer?
Well, I think everything Tony said is right. I think the supply chain is a real concern. The other major concern is probably just cost issues. We have a lot of providers who are under financial strain because of the funding issues that we were talking about earlier. Yep. And any sort of economic shock, any sort of price rises will hit them, and the problem is, if they are already in a fragile financial state, then that could potentially push people into insolvency, and that, of course, has terrible knock-on effects, not only for that company and the people who work there, but the people who are using the service, living in the service, and their families. So that is a real concern, the fragility of some providers, and you know, some providers are more financially robust than others, and it's the ones who are kind of, you know, just kind of squeaking by that I think, you know, there are concerns about. So that is, I think that's a concern because the knock-on effects for people, the people living in a care home, for example, can be really, really devastating. When you are very elderly, very frail, have severe dementia, a move can be quite damaging for you. So I think that what people probably need to do, what the government probably needs to do is find a way to implement some protections from the impact of those financial shocks on those providers. So things like perhaps a colleague of mine has suggested a VAT exemption for care providers. You know, just something to sort of ease the pressure a bit and allow them to be sufficiently robust to withstand the economic shocks that might come with a no-deal Brexit.
Now, look, you've both been great guests, and thanks a lot for that, Mei Ling. I'm very conscious of time here. So just briefly, and let me come to you first, Tony, just briefly, if there was one kind of policy issue you would like to see implemented, what would that be?
Crikey, one. There's so many.
Just one, please.
I think we have to find a better way of funding the sector. It's simple as that. There has to be cross-party agreement on how we better fund this essential service. So, in terms of policy, that's complex, but we need to sit down as a country and stop playing politics with this.
Great. Okay. And Mei Ling?
I fully agree with that. I can't think of a bigger issue, and I think this has been used as a political football for at least a decade, and that the time for that to stop is now, really. There needs to be some cross-party work on it.
Okay, thank you both of you. And look, big thank you to both of my guests, Mei Ling Huang, partner at law firm Royds Withy King, and also to Tony Stein, Chief Executive of Healthcare Management Solutions. Thank you also to Sophie for a great support on managing the calls made to the show, and who has just returned from our wedding and honeymoon. Why not stay tuned for BBC Radio Kent and Paul Miller,